They left in a week. Now, just think a moment. Could you or I walk from here to Ithaca without good boots, rain gear, a proper map? They had none of that. They were allowed one satchel each, and they took things like, Clara took drawing paper. They were already talking about a book. And those skirts, of course. What they did was to follow the railroad lines. The railroads had thrown rails across the country as straight as they could manage, and they followed them. Now, of course, a railroad engineer, he comes to a ravine, he just throws a trestle across it. A trestle has no handrails. They took turns about who went first. Most of the time they could sleep in the abandoned dormitories that had been put up for the railroad workers not too long before. Some of the times, of course, there were towns, and they had to work. They walked right through their shoes. So they hit upon a scheme in which they would write to the newspaper in a town they were approaching. A piece would be published about them, and they would be known. There was curiosity. They could find work. In fact, by the time they got to St. Louis, in a very high-class hotel, the diners almost went hungry because the staff was all out in the dining room, in the kitchen, listening to Hilda and Clara talking about their stories. But there was a lot to happen before then. Hilda, well, she was a woman of her time, and she hated and feared the red men. But they walked across 2 reservations and were treated kindly. And Hilda, she was woman enough to change her mind. Most of the time, of course, there were just the 2 of them and that far horizon. What do you think of those 2? All their lives together. There's always been a baby to nurse, a toddler to keep from the stove, a cow to milk, a row of beans to hoe. No. There was nothing but each other and that receding horizon. They talked. They talked about women's suffrage. They were for it. They talked about politics. In 1896, it was one of the great realigning elections of our history. Hilda, she had seen enough of what happened to poor people. She was for William Jennings Bryan and the common man. Clara, she was to become a banker in the future. She was for sound money. And William McKinley. Well, the 2 of them noted that they were going to go through Nebraska and Ohio, and why didn't they stop and see the 2 candidates? So they had hit on another device. When they went somewhere, they would get someone to sign, attesting that they had been there. For the book, of course. Now, when they were in Nebraska, William Jennings Bryan was off campaigning, but Mrs. Bryan had them to breakfast, and they had a lovely time. And when they got to Ohio, they did meet the future president, but a lot was to happen before then. Somewhere in all those miles, Clara found out that she wasn't Papa's daughter. Oh, all the others, yes, but not her. It's okay, Mama. I'm all right. I'll be all right. And then, why or how, after all those millions of steps, Clara caught her ankle and went down, just on a rough piece of ground, and the pain shot up her leg, and more than the pain was the terror that she would make them too late. that she would make them fail. Well, it wasn't broken. It was a bad sprain, so they taped her up. There was nothing else for it but to wait. Now, as they got further east, trying to make up time, it became more complicated. You couldn't just follow the railroad in the east. But they made it to New Jersey, and then someone gave them a bum steer, and they went north. And the clock was ticking. They had promised to be there in December before Christmas. On December the 24th, they stepped foot on Manhattan Island, were directed down to the New York World paper, went up in an elevator, went into the office and found that there was no $10,000. The sponsors had reneged, and they were now 2 immigrant women in a city full of immigrant women looking for work. But worse was to happen. When they got, finally a delayed letter came from home. Parents of this generation feared diphtheria. They didn't know, of course, how to prevent it. Belinda, the birth of the second down daughter, had been working in Spokane Falls as a domestic to help the family. She came home with a sore throat. Papa told her to go in the house, and he sent all of the rest of them out to the shed, and he told them they weren't to come out for any reason. And yes, the neck swells, and you watch your child suffocate. Bertha died the next day. And Papa, he had to go and stand out in the yard and tell them he couldn't touch them, and no minister or neighbor would come. He built a coffin, and he buried his daughter alone. And now the wait started. Who next? Who next? Jimmy, the 9-year-old. It's what they call the ox throat. He lasted only about 7 hours. Now, you know, families do different things with sorrow. This family, without discussion, decided that if Mama and Clara had not gone, this would not have happened. And they held to that for a lifetime. When Hilda and Clara finally got home, someone had given them a railroad pass part of the way. There was no discussion of what they had done. There was certainly not going to be a book. And there was something else that happened. Do you know, when you're sitting at the dining room table and someone starts to talk, and all of a sudden, all the attention goes over here. That's what they did to Mama. Oh, they were not overtly rude to her. Papa would not have stood for that. But there was a scrim that went down. Clara could not stand it. How do you take pomposity from people you have diapered? She tried. She tried hard. She took a course in the business school. She got a job as a teller. She commuted into Spokane Falls with a neighbor and contributed to the family, but it worked on her. So one day, again, in that scrubbed kitchen, she found her mother and said, Mama? Mr. Leonard got a letter from his brother-in-law in San Francisco. There's a job for me. It's a good job. I'd be head of the other tellers. Mama, I'm going. It's all right, Clara. I'll be all right. And Clara, you help those women down there get the vote, you hear me? And she did. Clara became not only a suffragette, but one of the leading business people in that community. She was a banker that the other bankers feared and tried to get around. Oh, well, they called her the little lady. They made the deals at the bar. She ran circles around them. People came to her and said, how do you do it? She said, oh, well, I have been to New York City. Now, I'd like to leave the story there, but there's a piece. You see, when Papa died in a building accident, Mama moved in with a daughter, and she fixed a place for herself in her small room, a writing table, and she wrote. Page after yellow lined page, she wrote about the trip. She wrote about what they had done and who they had met. And it was never mentioned. And when she died, an old lady, it was 1942, her daughter and the daughter-in-law came and picked up everything and took it down and burnt it in the backyard. But the daughter-in-law, she saw there were some newspaper clippings mixed with the pages, and she couldn't resist. She took a couple of them and put them in her apron, never told her husband. The family discipline was strong, but after she died, some of her children found the newspaper, and one of the boys wrote an article for a high school history class. It was entitled, Grandma Walked Across America. And his teacher found it intriguing. And that's how the story started unwinding, and why we know a little bit about these two extraordinary, spunky women.
Do you know what I'm saying?